They were part of the Battery E 2nd Artillery. In the beginning, the first soldiers that came were from the called Company M. They were also artillery. On January 15, 1870, the Washington Territorial Legislature bought the fort buildings for $850. It had cost the government over $200,000 to build them. But the government did not give the land to the state at that time. Instead, it took an act of Congress to do that in 1874. And the land was to be used for an insane asylum, and they used those words then, and for no other purpose. And that has given us quite a bit of thought in Lakewood today. When people want to use it for other things, the Congress says no. So that has protected that land. We can use it as a park. But one little caution is that all of that land that we consider to be Fort Steilacoom was not what Fort Steilacoom was in the beginning. When Congress gave the land to the state, there was only a little over 300 acres, maybe almost 375 acres. And the hospital gradually got up to about 600 to 700 acres, or 800 acres, through purchases of the land, to increase their farm. These buildings were, of course, to be used for no other purpose than, were to be used as a hospital. And the barracks, which is the longer building, were sometimes moved together with some of the houses and formed wards for the patients. The first 21 patients came from Monticello on August the 19th, 1871. You know where Monticello is? You know where Longview is?
Yes.
In that area. They had some really bad experiences with the first people who were out of their mind in those times. And matter of fact, the first person to be insane at Fort Steilacoom was one of the soldiers. He thought everybody was conspiring against him, and he was going to kill them. And so they had to put him in a straitjacket and chain him to the floor. And they put him on a ship back to the east in chains. But he gradually did recover, they tell us. Of course, the next insane person was in the town of Steilacoom, who was Balch's brother, who would get these, when the moon would go high in the sky, he'd get this urge to howl. And one night he ran into the woods doing this howling, he tripped over a log and killed himself. Of course, Balch, Lafayette Balch was the founder of Steilacoom, and his unfortunate brother's house is still there. Lou and Lyle Duncan remodeled it and sold it. It's that gingerbread house not far from where the post office is, up on the street above there. That was Balch's brother's house. I'm getting that dry mouth feeling. Some of the buildings then were used for patients, and others were used for hospital staff. The main building in the center there, which was the commanding officer's home, became the home of the hospital superintendent, and was used for many years. Over time, however, I have to push this button a little longer here. Some of the houses were torn down, the barracks were torn down. In between the houses that exist today, there was, an additional house, which is now gone. There are only 4 of the officers' houses left on the facility. There in the center is the commanding officer's house again, which was used by the hospital superintendent. The house closest to you on the screen has been remodeled today and restored to represent a married officer and his family. So we are using that as a museum today. You can see my slide change. That's this technology, I guess. Construction of the first brick buildings at the hospital began in the 1870s, and that wasn't long after the hospital opened, remember. The hospital opened in 1871, and just a few years later they began those brick buildings. Now this building that you see here is where the main administrative building is today, but it isn't the same building. They tore the original building down long ago and rebuilt on the same site.
Is that the state?
Well,
The territory.
the territory, it was a territory at that time. It says Rogers here, so that must be the construction company was Rogers of Olympia. Well, by 1902, this hospital was absolutely huge. Look at that complex. That's 1902. It's the turn of the century.
Yeah.
The hospital had some very far-looking administrators.
On the right, is that a laundry facility? On the far right?
It's probably a powerhouse heating plant. You can see the smokestack on it, right. Now, if you look at the buildings today, they have sort of that same style. Even though they tore those buildings down, they rebuilt with the same architectural look. Under the administration of Dr. Walkup, here Lakewood, named after him, he had an orchard planted. That orchard still exists today. I just took this photo 2 days ago. It's really kind of a ghost of an orchard on the south hill of just in front of Steilacoom Boulevard that you see here. So when you pass through there sometime, look at it. These are apple trees, and I don't know that they're much good anymore, but they still do bear fruit.
Yeah.
Under Dr. Walkup, they also built chicken coops and hog pens, sheep sheds, and essentially established a farm. And that farm was able to sustain a good deal of the hospital in those days. But it also provided work therapy for the patients. I'm waiting for this long slide to change. They also then had a dairy, which was expanded by Dr. Keller. And they built a number of barns that are still on the property. Some are in very bad shape right now because they don't have the money to fix them up. But some of them they have repaired. This is about the only legacy that really exists of the old farm buildings on the property. The others, the sheds, chicken houses, were torn down a long time ago. Though when they first built the college, I would go out in the woods and I would find old doors from the hospital as shelters for probably pig pens out there. Now, Dr. Walkup also was an arborist, and he planted many different kinds of trees on the property, including those which still survive along Steilacoom Boulevard. We lose more and more every time we have a windstorm, and they're rotting in bad shape. But under Dr. Keller, he continued Dr. Walkup's landscaping, and now there is a creek that runs through this property down to Chambers Bay. You know where that creek is? It goes behind the property. And it's really a ravine in the canyon. And he beautifies that by putting in waterfalls and many plants on the hillside, and really making it a very scenic, beautiful, restful place. There is an artesian well down there. If you go down there, there's a old fish hatchery down there now too. But there's an artesian well where the water just bubbles out over that pipe by volumes, and that provided water for the fort in the early days and for the early hospital. But now the hospital gets its water from those tanks on Marijuana Hill. That's what we called it when I was at college. This shows that pathway which became the main way to reach the hospital in the early days, because a streetcar stopped at about the point where the old pulp mill, paper mill is down there, because that's where it empties into the bay. And there was a streetcar stop. So the people would walk up from there. But later they built a new line along Steilacoom Boulevard. It wasn't called that in those days, but that let people off at the front door of the hospital and became the main entrance after that. Sorry. The hospital continued to use these buildings up into the 1960s, so they tore more and more down until there were only just the 4 left. That's what, oh, thank you, yes. She recognizes that I have to drink some water. This picture, this next picture was taken in 1929. Notice how we date that? See the old automobile out there? But also many of the trees became covered with ivy, including the hospital. The hospital at one time was just thick with ivy in the front, before they rebuilt it in the 1940s.
Wow.
This is a picture of the commanding officer's quarters, or the superintendent's house, in 1948. You know, it's really quite attractive. And this is what it looked like in 1949. I think I have to push the button again here. There it goes. Finally, the buildings were left to go to ruin. And the hospital quit maintaining them because they wanted to build a child treatment center at the location of the fort. But Happy heard about that, and he and Rita decided, no, you're not going to tear down Lakewood's history. You know, that's an important part of history for the Puget Sound area. So they got the remaining structures on the National Register for Historic Places in 1975.
Wow.
See, he was really busy back there saving our history. By this time, of course, the buildings were in really bad condition. You can see as we began to strip some of this off. Foundations were gone. The roof of quarters 4 was gone, and the water had seeped in, and the building was ready to collapse. Come on, slide. They have to change the building.
The noggin was crumbling too.
Right.
Wow.
And this is the interior of the quarters 2, the commanding officer's home. But over the years, the hospital had renovated and remodeled and wallpapered and put in things which were not period. For instance, these glass doors were period. Those were probably put in the 20s or 30s. But we stripped all of that away and restored it as best we could to the original.
Who's we, Marvel?
Well, I'll show you in just a moment here. Before the reconstruction began,